Hi, Joe Creighton here. You're listening to Retrospectives with John Broughton on KC Radio 97.7 FM.
Cast my memory back in time, living down by...
Just to start off, I was looking through your website the other day, and on it you credit sessions in your friend's brother's room listening to his blues and jazz records as shaping your taste in music.
That's correct, yeah.
What was it about those records that gave you the initial attraction, and what really grabbed you about them?
Well, look, to be quite honest, at that age, we're about, we were all about 14 or 15, and we were trying to be really hip,
Yeah.
And my friend, his brother he's sort of a bit of a beat sort of character, from that kind of, like wore Levi jeans, which no one did in those days. I'm talking about, back in 1964, 65. And we kind of would go in there trying to be really cool. We'd listen to a lot of, like Lead Belly and Sonny Terry and Brownie McGee, Big Bill Broonzy, Lightning Hopkins, Sleepy John Estes. And at first it was trying to be cool, but then the nature of that music is it kind of gets into your soul, and it sort of it takes root, and that's exactly what happened. And listening to that music at such an early age, because all our friends were listening to pop music and the Beatles and everything, and it's like I love the Beatles and everything, but my passion was really more into that kind of roots music and a little bit of jazz too. We used to listen to a bit of Charlie Mingus and Roland Kirk and Duke Ellington, Count Basie and stuff like that as well. And, a bit of Miles Davis and all that. And it's kind of whatever you're exposed to, I think, unless it's something you really don't like, does form your taste in music. So I've always gravitated towards those kind of sounds, and as I grew a bit older into the 60s, I listened to a lot more soul music, and then, less sort of country blues, a bit more Chicago blues, the electric thing. And also, at that time, my mother used to listen to quite a lot of country music, so I had a bit of Jim Reeves and Slim Whitman and the Everly Brothers and actually even Elvis Presley, that kind of music coming in. So those were the early influences for me.
Yeah, that's a brilliant musical education all up there.
It is. It's really, really good. Like it's interesting. My son, for a while now, he's listened to a lot of that kind of music too, due to me sort of, playing it for him. And like when he was 8, he used to watch, John Lee Hooker live video and really really enjoyed it. And I kind of thought, this is very interesting, and I know that has formed his taste in music a fair bit too.
Yeah. What about the bass guitar? What was the initial attraction to that as your instrument of fancy? Well,
actually, listening to my mum's gramophone, and it had 2 knobs. It had a volume and treble and bass knob.
Yeah.
And I used to turn the bass up really loud and just listen to some of those, that rockabilly sort of sound that Elvis Presley had in those early Sun recordings.
Mm-hmm.
I used to boom, 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 that kind of pounding bass. And I used to just love the sound of the bass. But I got guitar lessons when, from about the age of 12, I started doing guitar lessons. And it wasn't until a bit later that I bought a bass guitar, maybe more into my 20s that I started really actually trying to play the bass.
Yep.
And sort of had to jump in the deep end. I was a lead singer in a band back in about 1969 in Northern Ireland. And the bass player got sick, and I had been noodling a bit, nothing serious. And they said, "Oh, you're going to have to play bass," and I'm like, "What?" So I had to actually go home for 2 days and try and get around singing the songs that we were singing and playing the bass. So that was the start of my career as a bass player. I don't think I was very good by any means, but I was thrown in the deep end.
Yeah.
And away we went.
Was it a lively and thriving music scene in those early days in Ireland?
It was. There was a lot of music. Initially dating back from the late 50s into the 60s, there was a lot of show bands, and the show bands would travel all around Ireland. they'd set up and play in music halls and also in, like local kind of just scout halls and things like that, where they'd have a dance, and they'd play such a wide range. They'd start off probably playing, music for people to waltz to, things like that. They'd play a bit of Irish music, and then they'd start playing rock and roll near the end of the night, for the younger people, because these were sort of community events. So they would cover everything. So that tradition has been very strong in Ireland for a long time. A lot of very good music. Van Morrison himself came out of a show band like that. So did Rory Gallagher.
Yep.
And some of those people all came up through show bands, because they were basically like cover bands before we called them cover bands. And they'd have a few different singers in the band. Some of them were actually very good. They'd have a horn section and everything, and they were big bands. And coming into the 60s, a lot of them broke it down and started playing, and then they called them beat groups then, and it was basically bands like the Beatles and the Rolling Stones, and someone would continue to play sort of covers music. But if you look back, the Beatles really did that too. They used to get the records coming in from the Sailors and the Port of Liverpool, all the black music, and they would learn to play those songs. And same with the Rolling Stones. The Rolling Stones were very influenced, obviously, by Chuck Berry and Bo Diddley and a lot of that blues, and rhythm and blues music. So in Ireland there was a great tradition of that, and a lot of those bands would come over to Belfast as well. Bands like the Animals, the Pretty Things, and the Beatles, of course, and the Rolling Stones all would come over. It wasn't that far away.
Now, I believe...
And the local scene was very rich as well, of course.
I believe your first impressions of Australia's music scene was a bit of a disappointment to you.
Well, it was, because I came from that sort of scene in Belfast, where there were a lot of really good bands playing incredible music, and it was all... you've got to understand, in some ways, the hit parade, even in England at that time, the top 20 or top 40 had a lot of R&B in it. You had a lot of bands like the Pretty Things and the Rolling Stones featuring, and the Animals. There's like songs like House of the Rising Sun. What an incredible song to be a hit. That just wouldn't happen nowadays.
Nah.
A song like that, based in such a rich genre as it was, would just not feature in popular music, but it did in those days. And when I came to Australia, I found that it was much more pop oriented. You had a lot of... I know there was really great music here, but it was more underground in the clubs, and I didn't really know how to access that at the time. So all I was doing was watching TV or listening to the radio, and it was very much pop oriented. So I sort of freaked out a little bit. And then eventually I discovered bands like, Chain and Max Merton. Max Merton, Meteors, that was my savior. And it's actually unusual, because I've got Jimmy Sloggett in my band used to play with Max Merritt in the Meteors. And I remember seeing them and just thinking, goodness, finally I found some music that I like here. And because Max's band is just fantastic. They played all the great soul music and with such a passion too.
So it was tough to find like-minded musicians in those early days here.
I'm sorry, again?
It was hard to find like-minded musicians for you in those early days here.
It was. They were there, but they were around. But just I didn't immediately find a way to access them, and then gradually, and also the scene changed very quickly in Australia. You've got to understand also, like back in the early '60s, it took things quite a while to filter over to Australia.
Yeah. Because
just of the distance. Because a lot of communication was by ship. People would travel by ship, so like letters and things would get, or parcels. Everything came an awful lot slower, so you had a bit of a time lag. I got the feeling when I first hit Sydney in Australia, it felt like I was going back into the 50s in some way. Just fashion and everything. That changed very quickly, mind you, as communication accelerated at such an exponential rate in the 60s. With air travel, the whole thing. Like, it used to take a long time to get a letter to Australia, and then airmail gradually became more popular, and you sort of don't think about these things, like just how slow communication can be. I read a lot of historical fiction, and back in the 1800s, of course, communication took months and months. It could take 6 months to find out what was happening on the other side of the planet. That there's a war there, and this side of one, and I guess that that's just a thing that's accelerated gradually. And now it's instantaneous. We switch on our computer and we're everywhere at once. It's incredible.
You did go back home to Ireland for a while and found yourself in a band called Doll's House. What can you tell us about that band?
Doll's House was a band. When I went back, I'm trying to think what year that was. It was 1969, I think. I went back and some of my friends that I played with in my school band were actually in quite a popular band called Chips in Northern Ireland. They actually won the European Song Contest, I think, in the early 70s as well. But they were very popular. And I said, I'm looking for, I want to play in a band. And they hooked me up with this management company, and Doll's House were the guy who managed another band called Dweller's Dream, which were a band that were an Irish band that were doing quite well in London.
Yep.
And he managed Doll's House, so I started being the lead singer in that band and toured all around Ireland with it, and for about 9 months or so. It was pretty rough going in winter.
Yeah.
Traveling, in the back of a transit van all around Ireland, but that's what you did.
Yeah. You did seem to be torn between the two options at the time of going home to Ireland or settling here in Australia. What eventually brought about the change of heart and saw you back here?
How bloody cold it was, Lawrence. I thought, I remember one time we were going way up the north of Ireland, and I was literally sitting on, a couple of Marshall boxes in the back of a transit van with our manager driving, and we were skidding all over the roads. It was so icy and it was freezing cold. We did the gig, and the gig was horrible. And I started to think, Australia's not a bad place after all, is it really? It never gets quite this cold. So I ran back to Australia with my tail between my legs, sweating, promising never to complain about it again.
Just the other night, I was listening to the album Midnight Trampoline from Melissa, a band that you joined when you came back to Australia. It really holds up well these days. Do you remember having high hopes for that band?
Yeah, indeed, I did. We were managed by Dal Miles, who was a newsreader at the time, and he also managed Ted Mulray.
Yep.
And Ted had just had a big hit with Julia, I think was that song that he had.
Yeah, that's right.
I can't remember. And we were really hoping that it was going to do big things, and but it sort of just it just dwindled away. I'm still in contact with the drummer, actually. He lives up on the Central Coast.
Oh, good.
But it's very interesting, that album. I was talking to Stuart Fraser one day from John Farnham band, or Noiseworks as well.
Yep.
And Stuart said his nephews, both musicians, young musicians, sort of in their early 20s, and he said, "I'll bet you they know the band that you were in, Melissa." And I said, "No way." And he called them over. He said, "All right, tell me some of the songs on the Melissa on the Midnight Trampoline," and they knew all the songs on it. And I'd wondered, because I would see my royalty statements, and there was a lot of airplay for a couple of the songs that I'd written on that album, and I kept thinking, how can this be? And apparently it was there was interest from young bands that were into sort of prog rock.
Yeah, yeah.
And young musicians, so they were keeping it alive.
Yeah, those prog rock fans can be really, really devoted.
Yeah, it was incredible.
Now, another short-lived band you were with was Billy T, which you formed with Ross Hannaford. A great band, had a fantastic live reputation. What's your take on why that band didn't go beyond that one album? Because it had such great potential.
Look, it was probably Ross and my fault that at the time we were very involved in Miraji, who was a meditation teacher, and we kept sort of going off overseas, and we had another band that we used to travel when Maraji would give his spiritual discourses, we would play. That band was called One Foundation. And Billy T, the band, got a bit jacked off with us doing that, and they actually sacked us. They sacked Ross and I, even though we were the former members. So the band just wasn't able to continue very well after that, without the two original members. It was a shame, because I think it could have been worked out. I think that we could have worked out to be able to do both things. But you know what it's like in those days? You form a band, okay, you're loyal to this band or else you bugger off. Okay? A little bit of that sort of stuff. It's like nowadays, people, have to do a lot of different things, and they do. But I guess back then, and I understand what the other guys talked about, they felt that we were compromised because we were kind of really coming up to a certain amount of success. The album was released and we're getting a bit of airplay. We're getting a bit of interest. We're packing out venues all around, particularly Melbourne, but in other parts of Australia too. We had a very good live reputation as a good rock and fun band, Also, we were sort of pioneering a kind of music that was very new as well. Playing in a lot of big rock pubs, they sort of really wanted to hear bump, ba bump, ba bump. They really wanted to hear Thorpe and Lobby Lloyd and stuff like that. We were coming in playing reggae music, for God's sake, and soul. And it was just like some of the people in some places, the inner city loved it, but when you played at some of the big sort of beer barns, they'd sort of look at you and like, what is this? This is not music. So we kind of did pioneer a certain amount of music at that time. So I think the band could have been very successful. It was kind of snuffed out in its infancy, really, in some ways. Yeah. I hate to say.
A band ahead of its time.
A little bit, yeah. It was a little bit, I think.
I believe George Harrison was a bit of a fan of that One Foundation band that you were involved with.
He was, indeed, yes. Yeah, I had, when I was doing the Tin Fin tour, Escapade, and I went up from Melbourne to, Ricky Fattar was the producer on that, and also he was the sort of MD for the band. He was the drummer. Ricky had been the drummer in the Ruffles, and if you remember that one of those spoofs with George Finance,
yeah.
And also Ricky still plays with Bonnie Raitt, and he's produced quite a few of her records, and he was actually played on the Holland album with the Beach Boys. Of course, he was an incredible musician and a brilliant drummer, and he called me up to come and play on the tour, and he lived in a house in Edgecliff and Woollahra, I think it was, in Sydney, and I arrived at this beautiful big house, and I knocked the door, and Ricky was on the phone. He came in and he said, I'm just on the phone, Joe, come in and go into the front room and just introduce yourself to George in there. And I didn't know George, who's George anyway. So I walked in the room and I looked at the sky and wow, he looks really, really very, very familiar. And it was George, and he said, "Oh, g'day, Joe. How's the weather in Melbourne then, eh?" And it was George Harrison. And I'm just like, my God, here I am standing on my own, awestruck in front of a Beatle. Anyway, we went out to lunch at the nice little Italian in Surrey Hills, Mario's, and I was sitting right opposite George at the sort of bench table. And I mentioned to George, I said, I know some people actually that know your wife very well, because his wife was involved with Gumraji as well.
Oh, yeah. And
Olivia, his wife was, and he said, "Oh yeah, you're talking about that? Yeah, that lot." He said, "Yeah," and he said, "I have no time for that guru." He said, "He drives around fast cars and airplanes." He said, "I mean, I do that." He said, "But I'm an ex-pop star, that's okay." And he just kept on going on all this stuff, And then I said to him, "George," I said, "do you talk to your wife like this, And he said, "Oh, no." And I said, "Well, she doesn't like it?" He said, "No." And I said, "Well, I'm not that crazy about it either." He said, "Oh, look," he said, "I'm really sorry. I'm really sorry." He said, "The only thing I liked about that whole thing was the band One Foundation." And I said, "Oh, wow." I said, I was a singer and bass player in that band, And he said, "You were? Wow." And then he started asking me about all these songs that we did, because he had invited us to come and record in his studio when we were in America at one point. And here am I, sitting at a table, eating pasta, talking to a Beatle who's asking me about my band, you know, and it was just mind-blowing, you know, and I'm just sitting there going, this is what life is just sometimes very, very strange, the way it turns things around, you know, but it was a really interesting experience, you know, meeting him.
One of the very first people I interviewed for radio about 25 years ago was Mark Gillespie, a fascinating character who just all of a sudden just walked away from music. Tell us about hooking up with Mark and working with him.
Well, it was around about the time that Ross and I had Billy T, or I can't remember if Billy T had fizzled at this point, but I was sitting in my flat one day, and I got this knock on the door, and this tall, dark guy, all dressed in black and looking very unusual. I guess it was sort of pre-punk kind of, you know, he had that look about him, you know, sort of unwashed and, you know, leather jacket and everything. And he said, "Oh, hi, I'm Mark Gillespie." I said, come in. And he said, "Look," he said, "I'm a big fan of yours and Ross Hannaford." And he said, "I want you to come play in my band and do an album with me." And I was sort of like, "Oh, what, you want me to sing some of my songs or what?" Because I saw myself as a singer-songwriter bass player, not as a hired gun, because I'd never done that, you know, just gone and played bass for someone.
Yeah.
And he said, "No, I don't want you to sing your songs or anything. I just want you to play my songs." Because I said, "Why don't you get a bass player? You know, I mean, there's all these great bass players in Melbourne, like, you know, Barry Sullivan and Mike Clark and Bob Ar." I said, "Why don't you get one of those guys? They're like, that's their specialty." He said, "No," he said, "I like what you do, and I want you in my band." And he said, "I've just spoken to Ross, and he's okay with it." So I said, "Oh, well, okay." You know, it was like a really unusual thing for me. I didn't, you know, I'd never been asked to do that. So that was the beginning, in a way, of my career as a hired gun. Because I went off and, you know, did quite a few gigs with him.
Yeah.
And then I did the Only Human album. And when that album came out, my phone just didn't stop ringing because it was, you know, a lot of people. Mark's music was easy to play bass. It sort of lent itself to really good creative bass lines. And it seemed to be, I was quite good at that. I don't think I was particularly like a flash bass player, that, you know, hired gun type. But I sort of became that a little bit, you know, and it was due to that album.
Yeah.
My phone just didn't stop, and everyone just wanted a piece of that on their records, which was sort of a little bit daunting for me, because it put a pressure on me that I'd never had before, you know, walking into a session with someone's song and away you go play, you know, or someone put a chart in front of me. I couldn't read music, you know. I'm like, oh dear, you know. I said, "Look, I can't read." And I said, "Oh, it doesn't matter, just play whatever you feel like. You'll probably come up with something better than it's written anyway." And away you go, you know. So many albums later, you know, that was sort of a career course for me for a while.
I guess in a similar vein, from working with Mark, working with Vanetta Fields probably opened up some doors for you being in demand as a singer.
Yes, it did. I met Vanetta on the Escapade tour as well. So that was sort of an interesting thing. And we were talking, it was a sort of a party after the tour had happened. And I was quizzing Vanetta because I wanted to do this gospel group, you know, and I had a few people in mind. I said, "Look, I've got this kind of singer and this kind of singer, and I want to do this and this and this." And I said, what do I need? She said, "Well," she said, "he could do that, and then that person could do that." And then said, "I could do," I said, "You could do? What do you mean you could do?" She said, "Well, would you like me to play as well, sing with you as well?" And I'm like, "Are you serious? Vanetta Fields wants to come and play in my band?" And she said, "Yeah." She said, "And even better news I have for you," she said, "my friend Shirley Matthews is coming next week, and she's going to need a gig as well." So it was like, oh, goodness gracious me, you know, I thought I died and gone to heaven, like singing gospel songs and with two black girls. You know, it was just like, here we go. And we started getting a lot of sessions around town, you know, because what they did was they used to have a group called the Blackbirds, which was Vanetta Fields, Shirley Matthews, and Clyde King.
Yeah.
And they did like, chewed up so many of the sessions in LA through the 70s, you know, Boz Scaggs, Bob Dylan, Humble Pie, Barbra Streisand, all kinds of stuff. They were it in Los Angeles all through that period. And Vanetta had actually come out to Australia with Boz Scaggs and Mark Hunter talked her into staying. So that was just incredible, and they really did help me a lot. Vanetta would sing the high part, I would sing the middle part, and Shirley would sing the low part. And they would have all these signals, to do, like, for instance, to say you were in C, you're singing a C note, and to jump a third, you go up to an E, so you'd move your harmony up, and everyone would move together, and they'd have the signal, which would be one finger up and then a 3 after it, like that. You can imagine that on the radio. One finger, then 3. So then up a third, jump your harmony. It's, at that point in gospel music or in soul music, you just want it to get more intense, so you just bang, you hit it really hard, and you jump the harmony up like that. Everyone jumps up so everyone's jumping up on the next person's harmony. And of course, I would be a bit slow with this stuff, so next thing I get a whack in the head, come on, child, keep up. So they licked me into shape, you could say. So it was good. We had a lot of fun doing that.
And of course, that led you to many years in John Farnham's band, and also touring with the likes of Olivia Newton-John and even Kylie Minogue.
That's correct.
And suddenly you're playing arenas all of a sudden and stadiums, and playing music that I guess would be fair to say was a bit removed from your musical DNA. Did you adapt?
Extremely. It was, because I remember Frank Stavala at the bar after a show one time, just looking at me, said, "Come on, have a drink, Joe." And he said, "Man," he said, "I got to tell you, you're the last person I would expect in this band." And it was kind of, I had a great time because, John incorporates some of those, the gospel things in the vocals and things like that. So, and also, singing with Vanetta and Lindsay and Lisa was kind of, we had a pretty powerful vocal section there. So there was a lot of fun on the road. But yeah, some of the music was a little bit different than what I was into.
Did you enjoy the lifestyle of the massive on the road touring experience though?
Look, it was good. It would be a difficult lifestyle, I think, to have all the time. And if you live in somewhere like America, although I think that's quieting down a little bit, and we're playing on a big band, that would just be year in, year out on that level. I think it would be difficult, because every night's a party if you want. It's there because you're in a new town or a new group of people, and it's the after show thing, and it's why a lot of musicians really come to pieces very early. And I think you have to. One of the things that I did, I always used to try and keep very fit. At least we were staying in good hotels, and there was always a good gym. So I'd go to the gym and just be moderate. With the first week you'd be like, "Oh, this is really good fun, getting back with everyone. Everyone's drinking and that." And after a while, you start to feel, "Gee, I'm not feeling too good." You just can't go on living like that every night. Well, you can. Some people do, but I find that I couldn't. Live like that. So my answer to it was to try and be moderate and keep very fit.
Just the same, I guess it would have been a big decision for you to step away from the security of a gig like that. But was there a defining moment where you just knew it was time to walk away and start pursuing your own thing?
Yeah, it wasn't doing it for me anymore. And it's like, no matter how much money you get, I've never been a type of person that can just take the money and run. I can do that for a minute or two, and it wasn't satisfying me musically anymore. Not that it ever did, but I always had, solo career or albums or other stuff that I could do on the side, with it as well. But after a while, it just got to the point. There was a very big tour came up. It was going to be the Tents tour, where John wanted to really go right into the bush and everything and do the whole thing. And the tour was going to be 8 months. And my partner was pregnant with our child, and I didn't like the prospect of going away that long and coming back and my child not knowing me. And also, I felt that she, in those early stages, really, needed the support of, the parent, the second parent. The bringing up a child on your own, I think, would be very difficult. And it would basically, 8 months is a long time at that early period. So that was part of what drove the decision as well. It was economically a difficult decision to make, because it was a pretty lucrative situation. But look, you do what you do. I don't have any regrets of doing it because, I got to be very hands-on with my son. And those early and those are precious moments. Those are that's the stuff of good songs. You know?
That's so true.
Those moments they don't come back. You know, you only get one shot at them.
Has it been difficult to at first gain acceptance for your own work, to have people in the industry see you as something beyond the session player and sideman?
Very much, absolutely. I was shocked actually in some ways when I released my first album in 1993, 1994. And I contacted, because I knew all these R&A guys in a lot of the record companies. I had access to them because I played on all the albums of their artists. And I sort of expected, yeah, come in, Joe, yeah, let's have a listen to what you've got, you know. Yeah. And I almost got like, you can't be a front man. You're a side man. Why don't you just do what you're good at and leave us alone? It was almost like that. It was quite shocking in a way, because I kind of thought, oh my God, this is the worst kind of rejection in a way. But I forged ahead, and that first album got incredible reviews. It didn't sell a hell of a lot because it didn't have a big record company behind it driving that. You really needed that in those days. Like in those days, record companies would just pump hundreds of thousands of dollars into records promoting them. I didn't have anything like that. The best thing I got was like sort of doing a support tour of the Neville Brothers, which was quite, it gave me that with a great audience for me.
Yeah. And
a couple of DJs in Sydney and Melbourne played some of the tracks, but without that big momentum of a record company, there was no way it was going to be a big seller. But it still sells now. I still sell. People still say to me, "Oh, I've still got that album. I still play it." And that was sort of the story with that.
Yeah. Was it?
I didn't know what happened really.
Was it a big transition for you going from sideman to fronting your own band suddenly?
It wasn't really, because that's what I'd started off doing.
Yeah, true.
I was always a lead singer in a band, and picking up the bass it pushed me one step back in some ways, because, to give you an example, even some of my peers, when I released my first album, had heard the album, and a couple of people even said to me, Joe, I heard your album, it's fantastic, I love it. Who's singing on it, by the way? And I just look at them like, are you serious? Who do you think is? Oh, is that you? Oh, wow, that's great. Wow, I didn't realize I'm like, okay, all right. Because it happens when people see you behind another singer, they assume that, well, if you were going to be the singer, you'd be the singer, wouldn't you?
Yeah.
But they don't realize that you never know what's behind another singer.
Yeah. Hey, your Van Morrison shows have been a great success and much acclaimed. Any thoughts of putting together an album of Van Morrison covers?
Look, I have been asked quite a lot to do that, and the thing I sort of say to a lot of people, it's like, if you want a Van Morrison recorder, why don't you just buy one of his albums, because it's all there. I mean, I may do it at some point. It's just that it's an expensive thing to do, and I've got to get that. See, when I release my own, when I do my own albums, I do a lot of it at home. I bring people in, and that when I want people to help me out and stuff like that, and I don't have to get any license to release the material, but I would have to do that for Van stuff. Not that it would be a big deal, but I'd probably have to go in a studio and record it properly. And it's just extremely expensive to do nowadays. It can cost, like I costed an album recently, and you very little change at $20,000.
Yeah, true.
And it's very difficult to get that back nowadays in the record market. So there is the economics of it, of whether it would be viable, if it would even pay for itself. It may not, But there would be, people say, "Oh, I want you to, record it off a live show," but I'm sure I would never be happy with my vocal, because, like the live vocals sort of go for things, and, things get a bit scratchy, and it's hard to get a really good, live performance that's going to be good enough to sell. I'd probably, I'm a bit pedantic with stuff. I'd be in there trying to redo vocals and stuff like that. It would sort of defeat the purpose of it a little bit.
Yeah. How difficult is it putting a show together like that and being wary of cynical people not just looking at you as a Van Morrison cover band, but you've got to have your own stamp on it?
Well, I do cop that a bit. even still, people who come see the show don't think that, you know, like anyone who comes see it, feel they get it, they get the experience. This is about, you know, my experience growing up in Ireland and about the music, and it's my taste in the, you know, the kind of music that I select for the show as well. I mean, there's a lot of things I have to play that I probably prefer not to play because, you know, hardcore Van Morrison fans just want to hear the hits. They want to hear Brown Eyed Girl. Brown Eyed Girl's probably been one of the most overplayed songs in the universe. Still a very fine song, but it's probably a song I prefer to rest, but I couldn't do a show without doing Brown Eyed Girl. You know, it's just, it's people really want to hear it. I prefer to go for, I do, you know, a fair bit of, you know, the Astra Week stuff and some of the earlier Caledonia Soul stuff and that. And that's where I prefer it. But I do take notice of what people come and say to me, this song would be great. And sometimes I might think, I don't know whether that song will work or not. And then I might try it and be surprised that, yes, it does work really well. So I try to be open to what people suggest and also what the other musicians suggest to me in the band. The whole thing about the show is really an experience. When I first kicked up with it was like 3 years ago, and I went to see the guys that ran the Caravan Club, and I told them about it, and they kind of said, "Oh, gee, Joe, sounds a bit tribute band, cover band. I don't know if it'd be for us." I said, "Look, think of it more like the way Tex Perkins does The Man in Black, or the way John Waters does the Lennon Show, Glass Onion."
Yeah.
So think of it more in those terms of an experience, not entirely theatrical, but more towards that, you know. I said, "Oh, yeah, okay." So I was joking with Peter Foley the other day, and I said, "Look," I said, "you weren't interested in this. You give me your shittiest night, Thursday night." And he said, "No, I did not. I'd never do that." And I said, "You bloody did." And we laughed. And I said, "I bet you a bottle of wine we didn't." Well, I won, okay, because I went back on the records, and it was a Thursday night. But we put 300 people into Caravan Music that night, and that was pretty unheard of on a Thursday night. And we did it without horns. We just did it as a 5-piece band. And afterwards, I said to him, "You're not so lukewarm on it now, are you?" And he said, "No." He said, "Have you thought of doing it with horns?" And I said, "Yep, exactly what I'm thinking." He said, "Well, let's try it again." And we did it again with the horns, and it was amazing. And once again, we packed the joint out, you know, and away we went. And it's sort of, the rest is history. Yeah. I've rarely played to anything less than a full house.
Did you get to see Van a lot back home in Ireland?
A little bit, yeah. When I was really young, we used to go and watch them. I've never seen him play as a solo artist, apart from in videos and things. But we used to go. He used to come. I grew up in a little town outside of Belfast called Bangor, and there was a couple of scout halls, what was called the Forecastle, and Them used to come and play there a bit, and it was incredible. They were a brilliant band to see live, really very intense, and they were good. They were a good, really good band. That was exciting. So
your current album has a fantastic feel. It conjures up memories of the great soul sounds of the 60s. Was that your target sound when you were looking at putting this record together?
Not so much. I just had a bunch of songs, you know, and I started writing more and more. And the sort of the vibe on a couple of songs is I always loved Sam Cooke, you know, and Otis Redding. I like that sort of early 60s soul sound. And there's a certain excitement. There's also a great melody in it and nice feels. And I guess I wanted to do a few songs that were like that, but of course I couldn't do a whole album like that because then it would be themed too much. So I drew from that type of thing, the Sam Cooke, Al Green, Otis Redding kind of thing, and also a little bit of, you know, the swamp kind of blues thing, maybe Tony Joe White into some of the early folk blues artists. And also I've always had a passion for, you know, the kind of 60s funk that came out with, Isaac Hayes. Oh, yeah. Or even Into the Temptations. You know, like, I think one of the classic songs, Papa Was a Rolling Stone. Mm-hmm. And I wanted to capture a little bit of that dreaminess, you know, that song. I mean, that song goes on for it was a hit, big hit, number one hit, and it goes for 9 minutes. Like, figure that, how that could happen nowadays.
Good.
And it just keeps going. The bass line to boom, down, and then you get that beautiful trumpet sort of swimming on the top and a lot of reverb. So it's kind of quite ethereal, but yet very rootsy kind of groove. And that sort of appeals to me as well. So I try to sort of grab a couple of those different flavors within this album. It's sort of, and also an old concept that an album should be a journey, because a lot of people just buy individual tracks on iTunes. But if you start listening, a few people have said this, it takes you on a bit of a journey, this album. And I like that idea that an album, starts with one thing and then you end up somewhere else. It's like, whoa, okay. Rather than just song after song after song, that it's a little bit of a movement. But I know less and less people really listen to music like that. But I'm still a bit old-fashioned with that.
Yeah. So are you taking this album out on the road?
Look, I'd like to. I'd have to give it a bit of a test and see whether I can fill a venue doing Van Morrison songs. Now, whether I can fill a venue doing this, I'm not sure yet. I have to find out. A lot of people at my shows say, I'd like to hear more of your original, because I throw in a few songs within the show sometimes. And yeah, it'd be interesting to see. I used to be able to do it, and I'm just not sure. You just have to take things out. That's what business is these days. You just have to try things and see if they work, and see if there's the interest in them or not. Because people are very canny where they spend their dollar these days.
Yeah, very true. Okay, Joe, just before I let you go, 2016, what's that got in store for you? Any plans in the books?
Well, I've just moved house and I've got a nice new studio. I'm sitting in it now and I'm looking over this little sort of mini garden that's within the house with a little Buddha and a little sort of funny monkey statue. And it's a very inspirational place. And I'm looking forward to writing some songs sitting in this very chair that I'm sitting talking to you.
Cool.
So that's we've got quite a few shows for Into the Mystic coming up. We're going to Brisbane and we're venturing across the river in Melbourne. We haven't sort of gone onto the north side of the city that much. We've mostly been around sort of St Kilda and Oakley and Caulfield. So we're moving a little bit out in our territory. So hopefully there'll be a few more places that we can go this year.
Fantastic. Well, thanks so much for your time, Joe. It's been an absolute pleasure to catch up with you. Best of luck with the new songs and the new surroundings. Hope they inspire some great works. I'm sure they will.
Thank you, John. Thank you very much. It's been great talking to you.
You too. All the best for Christmas.
Thank you. You bet. Merry Christmas. Cheers.
Bye-bye. Bye.
Bye-bye.